Today, we will be having our fourth lecture on missiology. Chapter 5, Missions of the Early Church. Missions of the early church can be divided into two time periods. First, it is the time from the Apostle John's death to the time of Emperor Constantine. Second, it is the time from Emperor Constantine to the time of Emperor Charlemagne. Number 1. The age of missions of the early church. This was the time of Christ's ministry, the time when the disciples and the apostolic fathers were active. The apostolic time extends from the Apostle John's death to Emperor Constantine. It is from 100 AD to 313 AD. In the history of missions, we call this time the age of missions of the early church. We will look at the missionary work that took place in this time frame. 1. The expansion of mission work. If we see the records of the book of Acts, we learn about the expansion of missionary work, during which many believers were scattered to preach the gospel. In the apostolic age, the gospel was widely preached with the apostles at the center of the movement. Even after the apostles passed away, leaders effort to preach the gospel, centered on the 7 churches of Asia that appear in Revelation. The church planted many more churches. Missions work began to bloom in these churches. Famous leaders and scholars such as Ignatius, Justin Martyr, Eusebius, and Jerome greatly contributed to the work of spreading the gospel. Clement, Irenaeus, and the Apostle John's disciple Polycarp played a central role in keeping the faith and in spreading the gospel. Number 2, the center of missions. There were many central places for missions, but there are a few that stand out. Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the starting point of world missions. However, it is a symbolic region rather than the center of missions. Next is Antioch. Antioch was the headquarters for global missionary work. It served as the center of faith of the East until the establishment of Constantinople. The missions movement was based in Antioch, but it went as far as India to spread the gospel. The next region is Ephesus. Paul and John continued to work in Ephesus, and it earned its position as a center for missions. It also was the center of the Nestorian controversy. Center is Alexandria. Alexandria came to rise with the decline of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Ephesus. It emerged as a center for Christianity. Leaders like Clement and Origen came from Alexandria. Also during this time, Christian culture bloomed. Christian schools were founded in Alexandria, and the city made many efforts to teach proper faith and to train missionaries. This played a big role in the growth of the church. Number 3. The growth and influence of missionary work. Missionary work widely grew in the midst of hardship. The gospel, powerfully preached people every class, brought about a revolution of a new generation. The growth of missions influenced many people personally, but it also changed society. It is difficult to estimate the number of believers of this time. However, some estimate that around 10% of the entire population were believers. Number 4. The growth of missionary work and persecution. Beginning with the first martyrdom of Stephen, the church suffered under the persecution of the Roman government and pagan religions. At first, they considered Christians to be enthusiasts or fanatics. How Christianity grew to be more powerful, the Roman government began to implement policies of persecution. In the history of the church, persecution during the Roman period was severe, and it produced many martyrs. Believers who gathered in search of freedom first worshipped in the famous catacombs of the Roman times. Number 2. The Age of Missions in early Europe. This period refers to the time between Emperor Constantine and Emperor Charlemagne. The date is from 313 AD to 800 AD. the Roman government continued to persecute Christianity, but in 313, Emperor declared Christianity the state religion. Christianity no longer faced persecution, but it enjoyed the freedom of faith and identity. However, the church in its essence became secularized. Because Christianity became the state religion, many nominal believers entered the church. Through these people, the church was secularized, and it saw many problems concerning the legitimacy of faith. In the year 328, when Emperor Constantine relocated the capital to Byzantium, a place east of Rome, the church too separated into East and West. The Western Church evangelized immigrants who moved to their territory and to legitimacy of doctrine. However, the Eastern Church, because of disputes about theological doctrine, did not carry out its calling to do missions work. In this period, the monastic system was established, and in order to train leaders of the church, monasteries became active. But the church did not participate in missions. Evangelism happened only at the individual level. Number 1. Missionaries of this time. The first missionary we'll talk about is Theophilus. He was born in the year 311 and died in 388. His name means little wolf. Theophilus was an apostle who spread the gospel to the Goths of the north of the Danube River. At the age of around 20, he followed the Goth king Alaric to Constantinople. He remained there for about 10 years and grew into a great scholar of Christianity. As a missionary, he returned to the Goths and evangelized until all people received the gospel. In order to teach the Bible to the Goths, who did not have a written language, he created the Gothic alphabet. He also translated the Bible into the Gothic language. But in his translation of the Bible, he omitted the books of Kings and Samuel. Worried that the Goths, an aggressive people, would be stirred up because of the Bible. This Bible is the oldest Teutonic Bible. Over half of the Gospel books are preserved in Sweden's Uppsala college, and because it is written in silver on a purple background, it is sometimes called the Silver Bible. Our next figure is Martin. Martin was born in 316 and lived until 396. As Bishop of Tours, Martin, after invading the Franks and other northern tribes, worked as a missionary who paved the way to the region of Gaul. Early on, Irenaeus and other people introduced Christianity to this region. Martin, who was a soldier, did missions work in military style. With his base in Tours, he went to lead the monks to Gaul, where he destroyed their idols and preached the gospel. Today, he is revered as France's patron saint. The next person is Patrick. He lived from 396 to 493. He was from Scotland, but in his boyhood, he was taken captive to Glasgow and sold to a chief in Ireland. He escaped from slavery and received an education at a French monastery school. Afterwards, he returned to Scotland. He saw a vision, and he went to Ireland in obedience to that vision. He served in missions work there. For over 30 years, he proclaimed the gospel and planted numerous churches. He also established a monastery school and raised up many religious workers. Next, we have Columba. He lived from the year 521 to 596. Born in Ireland, he was a godly, gifted, and devoted person. To pay the debt of the gospel he incurred in Ireland and Scotland, he and his disciples went to the northern regions of Scotland and the nearby islands to preach the gospel. The figure of this time period is Augustine. He isn't the Augustine of Hippo. He was a great pioneer of England's missions. Leading 40-something Benedictine monks, Augustine went to England and spread the gospel. He practiced one-on-one missions. Many others also preached the gospel. In this way, missions in early Europe moved forward with vitality. Number 2, the rise and spread of Islam. As the gospel began to spread in different parts of Europe, a new religion emerged in the East, and this religion became Christianity's most powerful opponent. The founder of Islam, Muhammad, was born in Mecca in 570. He married the wealthy widow Khadija. When his life found stability, he began to study the Arabs' pagan temples, believing that Judaism and Christianity were teaching the Arabs strange things. At the age of 40, he declared that he saw a vision. When he was 40, he said he saw a vision. Muhammad claimed that he received a message that said, "There is no God but Allah." He also declared himself to be a prophet of Allah. He named his belief Islam, which means submission to the will of God. And because he strongly rejected idol worship, he was persecuted by the rulers of Mecca. In 622, he fled to Medina. At first, he tried to remove idol worship from his home country. However, when he and his small group of followers won in battle, his ambition grew to a desire for world conquest. His Arabian army consisted of zealous fanatics who were hungry for pillage and conquest. If the prophet gave a command, they actively obeyed to conquer multiple regions and cities. They made people choose between the Quran and death. Their attacks allowed territorial expansion to the eastern region of the Roman Empire, several regions in Asia, Egypt, North Africa, and more. In the West, they completely conquered Spain and began their attacks on France. But in 732, Charles Martel led the Frank army to defeat the Islamic army in Tours. Because of this victory, they were barely able to prevent Islam's violence in Europe. Followers of Islam believe in the Quran, which they believe is Allah's revelation to Muhammad. They also slightly change the doctrines of Christianity. From the birth of Islam until today, its conflict with Christianity. During the Middle Ages, Islam and Christianity warred with one another in the Crusade Wars. We have studied up to chapter 5, Missions of the Early Church. Next, we will study chapter 6, Missions of the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages span from the time of Emperor Charlemagne to Luther's religious Reformation. It is the period from 800 AD to 1517. We can define and explain missionary activity as happening in 3 ways. Number 1, direct missionary activity. In the Middle Ages, many leaders involved in the work of spreading the gospel. Number 1, missionary leaders. Our first person is Ansgar. Ansgar was born in 800 AD and lived until the year 865. She was a female monk from a French female monastery. She followed the orders of Emperor Louis to go to Denmark. She built Christian churches in Denmark and also did missions work. She also traveled to Sweden to preach the gospel. She suffered the attacks and persecution of pagans. However, Ansgar is now praised as a propagator of the gospel in North Europe. Next, Otto of Bamberg. Otto spread the gospel to the people of 12th century Pomerania. At this time, this region was under the rule of Poland, and it was suffering. Sponsored by the King of Poland, Otto extravagantly took his entourage and went to this region. There, they destroyed the Slavic people's idols and temples, and they succeeded in preaching the gospel of Christ. Third, we have Cyril and Methodius. They were Greek missionaries who were sent to Constantinople and Bulgaria. Cyril was a philosopher, and Methodius was a magician. They converted Emperor Maria and expanded the territory of missions to Moravia and Bohemia. Thus, they came to be known as Moravians when they stopped being active, and they translated the Bible to the Slavic language to bring many people to convert. Number 2, the repentance of the people of North Europe. The first region is Norway. Norway was introduced to Christianity by England in the 10th century. The brave Norman and his 3 princes, Håkon and the 2 Olafs, forced Christianity on the people. They forbade the worship of the gods Odin and Thor. They also and worked hard in evangelizing. Next, we have Iceland. Iceland became a colony to the noble Norseman family from the 9th to 10th centuries. The Norseman clan brought to Iceland their gods Odin and Thor. Then, one Icelandic person accepted Christianity. Afterwards, in 981, a monk landed in Iceland and began to evangelize. Norway's King Olaf continued to send missionaries to Iceland, which gradually led to the evangelization of Iceland. Next, we have Greenland. Greenland received the gospel from Ireland. The perceived was the son of a Norseman named Leif the Lucky and a Greenland person named Eric the Red. Next, we have the Russians' conversion. As a group, the Slavs converted to Christianity, and this happened in 988 with the baptism of King Vladimir. The Russians received Christianity when Princess Olga visited Constantinople in 955 and received the gospel and was baptized. The conversion of royalty led to the conversion of all the people. That is how Russia carried on the traditions of the Eastern Church. Number 2, the Crusades. Strictly speaking, that the Crusade Wars are an evangelism movement. However, the Crusade movement did have a large impact on all of civilization. This movement especially contributed to the globalization of Christianity. Number 1, the motivation behind the Crusades. The Crusades took place from 1095 to 1272 as an expedition to reclaim the Holy Land. Followers of Islam captured the Holy Land of Jerusalem, and they persecuted Christians and inflicted damage to pilgrims. Because of this, there was a higher sense of the need to save the Holy Land from the hands of Islam. The enthusiastic Peter the Hermit started this movement. Pope Urban II of the time greatly influenced the Crusades. The audience that heard Urban's sermon shouted, Deus vult, which means God wishes. Multiple factors make up the motive behind the Crusades. Freedom from sin, gathering the spoils of war, and religious zeal were all factors. This yielded a sort of mixed army. Number 2. The influence of the Crusades. The results of the Crusades were tragic. Many people died of fatigue and disease. Many were taken prisoners and many were injured. Temporarily captured Jerusalem, but it was once again taken by Islam. However, much was gained because of the Crusades movement. The biggest things that they gained are as follows. First, there was a deeper understanding between the East and the West. Frequently, because of the difficulty in communicating, the East and the West misunderstood each other. However, because of the Crusades, they came to understand and come in contact with each other. The Western people used to have prejudice against the Eastern people and hate them, but this changed. They learned to understand and sympathize with them. In this situation, missions was able to expand. Second, they came in contact with ancient civilization. The people who served in the Crusades made contact with the ancient civilizations of Greece and Saracen. By learning the sciences and arts of the East, they were able to introduce these subjects to Europe. Third, the development of trade. The development of communication and commerce brought the wealth of the East into Europe. Also, because the Crusade Wars required much economic spending, the gap between the rich and the poor shrunk. Next, there was a change in the church system. Of the Crusades, religious workers had a more peaceful relationship with regular believers. Unconditional respect for teachers disappeared at this time. Next, the regular believers became more knowledgeable. This allowed for evangelism to happen. The Crusades were not a missionary movement. but they paved the way for missions to places that did not know Christianity. During this time, Christians chased out many believers of Islam, and they spread the gospel of Christianity. Raymond Lull, who lived from 1235 to 1315 AD, was one of the leaders who worked for this cause. This concludes the theology. Thank you.